بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Dear doctors, scientists, fellow resident, medical student, and those people who came out of curiosity. Allow me to welcome you all to our workshop session. We're going to start by Dr. Samar Sagaf. For those who are in the medical field, Dr. Samar Sagaf is a well-known figure. She is the director of the healthcare education programs at SACM, Washington, D.C. Dr. Samar.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. The first يعني أول حاجة حقولها أباكم تحيوا البنات. البنات حضورهم فظيع. حيوا نفسكم يا بنات. The female is much more than the male. I'm not biased, but I think they are so well try to prepare themselves to be in US. To get in the US educations is something that everybody is dreaming of. Now a lot of school for administrators, TAs, للمعيدين والمعيدات إن هم they would like to go for North American. كلهم يروحوا لأمريكا أو كندا. اللي if you can يعني معلش يمكن كلكم تعرفوا إنجليزي. Can I speak in English? Everybody? Okay. So to start with, I want to welcome all our speakers, and they are coming from US, coming to you, open doors, and welcome you in their schools. As I usually said, we made from the impossible possible, but the possible is not for everybody. The possible is for whom that they work hard and they get all the requirements. We never agree with any school that they will lower their requirements. You are my students, you are the future leaders. We want to make and create a leaders, not a create a followers. So you have to work hard in yourself, in your requirements, and you have to meet the requirements of all the school, either medical or non-medical, and you will get acceptance. There is nothing called impossible. If you work hard in your resume, statement of purpose, you read a lot. اللي عجبني, I can say it, last 2 days, I have amazing students that they came to us. They put the extra mile. عملوا شغلهم وسووا كل الأشياء المطلوبة منهم وعملوا كل الليست بتاعت الجامعات اللي هم they would يعني they know that this list they will get it into their choices specialty that they want. They make all the list, and one of the student was, I cannot forget her, she emailed all the 34 schools that she wants to apply in their specialties perio في dentistry. And she got 16 acceptance for visiting. So she start also to go and visit. She's not asking for application. She only go for visits. And I assure you, you will get not less than 9 or 10 acceptance. So do the extra mile. This is what I want from you. Please, try to do the extra mile that will lead you to the best elite program. You dream for it, and also we dream for it. Thank you so much. ممكن دكتور خالد, I introduce Dr. Khalid, the moderator for and coordinator for our session, the vice president of Taiba University. I worked with him as a colleague when he was the dean of medical college. And Taiba, we can congratulate Taiba, all of you. They have 4 residents in the match this year.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم. Dear attendees, dear my colleagues in this session here. I want to thank the organizing committee for arranging this workshop, which is talking about and discussing the undergraduate and postgraduate education systems in the United States. I hope it will be beneficial for all of you who are willing to go and continue their education in the United States. And we have distinguished speakers here from different areas of the United States, and they will show us, they will tell us about how would we improve our applications, how would we improve the way that we apply so we can get accepted in the programs in the United States. This is the main issue, this is the main thing, is that we understand here, you understand what is the system there, and then to get help in how to apply and to how to get through the system there. And I hope by the end of the session we can have our objectives met today. So I don't want to take much of your time. I want to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Suhail Rao, who is the System Vice President for Research, Auctioner Health System, and the Vice President for the Middle Eastern region, Auctioner International. He also serves as a professor and deputy head of schools in Research Auctioner Clinical School and University of Queensland. Please welcome Dr. Suhail.
Assalamu alaikum. The topic that has been given to me this afternoon is to talk about undergraduate and postgraduate education, mostly from the viewpoint of what are the differences between the two, and also what is the philosophy that goes into both stages of education in the United States. Fortunately or unfortunately, I stand in front of you with experiences in at least 4 continents of either being a student or engaged in higher education. For my elementary and middle school, I went to Cardiff, Wales, so I have a lot of experience in England. And then for my doctorate, I also went back to University of Oxford, so I have both undergraduate or early education as well as postgraduate education experience in England. I also obviously have experience in Southeast Asia. I come from Pakistan. And I have been in the United States for the last 30 years, both as a student and also in senior administration in higher education. And very recently, for the last 3 years, we have been engaged with the University of Queensland in Australia. So probably my talk today is going to be tainted by my experience in at least 4 continents. But we're going to focus more on the United States, which actually is very common in all the 4 areas. So I'm going to talk about 4 different key tasks which were assigned to me by Dr. Khalid. We're going to talk about the role and importance of undergraduate and postgraduate educators. These are teachers. These are your individuals who are going to provide you with knowledge of collaboration, to collaborate more closely together. So how do the educators actually from undergraduate and graduate education collaborate? The second is how to bridge the gap between undergraduate studies and specialty training. And for a minute, I'm going to actually not wear my physician hat and talk about more generically as to what would you do if you have to go into a specialty training. I'll talk a little bit about a comparison between undergraduate and postgraduate studies, both similarities and differences, and then what are the cultural expectations. In the last part, I'm going to actually focus mostly on the United States because I believe that is one of the areas in one of the regions where majority of the students, at least in this particular group, might be interested in. So we have been told all along in our life as a student and then as a teacher that education is a continuum. Okay, you start to build your educational knowledge and skills from the elementary school, and it continues until you go into the university. What you learn in what we call K-12 in the United States is very relevant to what you actually practice in undergraduate and what you how it helps you in your graduate education. So this is a continuum. It's not, and that is one of the reasons why in the United States, the education falls under a single ministry, the Ministry of Education. And it is not actually subdivided into a Ministry of Education or Ministry of Higher Education. Everything falls as a continuum under a single ministry, under single policies and procedures of how a student is going to be mapped throughout their life as a learner. The more important difference that also exists in education in the United States is the continuous dialogue that takes place between various sectors of education, between the middle to high school, between the elementary to middle school, and between the undergraduate to graduate, which is extremely important. It is very important that the colleges know that the student who is coming to them has a certain breadth and depth of knowledge in a particular area. And it is very important for the graduate schools to know that the student graduating from the undergraduate program also have a certain depth and breadth of knowledge in certain areas that they are coming to. So there is a continuous dialogue between graduate and undergraduate and between undergraduate and high school and so forth, which is extremely important in higher education in the United States. So there is a need for this continuous feedback and dialogue between educators in various stages of education. For example, the universities traditionally reach out to high schools and advise them as to what are the areas of deficiencies or strengths that they are actually witnessing in the students that are coming into the undergraduate education in the university. This routinely happens. Routinely, the universities are going to actually set up a skills lab for not only the students in high school, but also the teachers in high school, to provide them with the skills that are required to prepare the students for a college life. So this is actually something that happens all the time in the United States. In fact, this is something that is actually funded by the federal government by a program called STAR, creating this is a program which actually creates the future teachers and students for academia and for research. And we actually at Auctioner have a NIH program which is funded by National Institute of Health and by the National Science Foundation called STAR. The more important thing is that each and every one of us, very early in life, exhibits certain aptitude. Some of us are great in maths, some of us are great in humanities, and some of us are great in music or history. And this is one of the uniqueness of the system in the United States, is that it does not provide mass education. It actually individualizes education based on your aptitude. Very often you have heard that parents are called very early in a student's life into the school, sometime even in elementary, where parents are called and told that your kid is actually very good in a particular area and we would like to give him additional classes in that particular area to exemplify this person's aptitude in that field. Now, this is something that is very unique in the United States, and so is it in Australia and other continents. So the whole concept of mass education is actually going away, and more individualized education is actually the norm of the day today. Now, remember, mass education is still required. People still have to take required courses in order to progress from one stage to another. But the concept of individualized and personalized education is gaining momentum in the United States. Now, one of the things which universities and colleges used to do was they never talked to the employers. They never talked to the consumers who are going to be the users of that particular individual, their knowledge and their skills. They felt, as academic institutions, that they know what exists out there, and therefore they are preparing the best product. Consider yourself as a product coming out of a factory. And if the consumers out there are not interested in what you have to offer, it is going to be very difficult for you to develop a successful professional life. This is changing. The change happened in 1998 when the Council for Graduate Studies in the United States created a program working with NSF where they actually invited the top 100 companies for a conference, a 5-day conference in Vail, Colorado, where they tried to actually ask those companies as to what are your needs, both in terms of knowledge and in terms of skills that you're looking for in individuals. And that changed. They brought a sea change in the curricula for master's and PhD degrees. It has now happened also in undergraduate education, and it is now actually reverse going back into high school education. So it is very important that you are trained and have the skills and the knowledge for a consumer, which could be a government, which could be a company, to actually utilize. And that is the reason why there is a constant dialogue now between the top 500 companies in the United States and between the universities, and therefore between universities and the high schools, as to what are the needs of the consumer. And that continuously impacts the direction in which that particular course or the curriculum takes. Now, how do we bridge the gap between undergraduate and specialty training? As I mentioned previously, there has to be a continuous dialogue. If I were to take for a minute, put on my hat from a medical profession, and for example, if we give an example of endocrinology as one of the specialty training for an internist who has gone through an internal medicine residency program, if the endocrinologist do not have a constant dialogue with the program in internal medicine, it's going to be a failure. If the neurosurgery does not have a continuous dialogue for people in prelim for surgery, it's going to be a failure. So I think there has to be a continuous dialogue between those who are providing specialty training and the undergraduate. We have to understand the behavioral education and applied skills required in graduates to succeed in specialty training. And I can tell you that one of the areas of focus in the United States is behavioral. Do you have the behavior that is required for you to succeed in specialty training? Do you have the attributes? And this has got nothing to do with your knowledge or your skills. It's your behavior. Okay, do you have the attributes to be a part of this particular faculty of specialty in the United States? And more focus is actually being placed on looking at your behavior as you move through undergraduate to specialty training. And as I mentioned previously, that there needs to be a continuous dialogue, but continuous dialogue alone is not sufficient. Individuals who are in specialty training must reach back into the undergraduate training and become part of the teaching academy of undergraduate training. So they are not actually viewing this at the end of an undergraduate training, but they are part and parcel of actually delivering undergraduate training, preparing the students for specialty training. And there needs to be proper guidance to graduate for specialty training based on their aptitude. It's extremely important. When a person goes through their academic life and wants to be let us say, an ENT surgeon, there has to be an aptitude that particular person must have in order to become an ENT surgeon. If one wants to become a physicist, there have to be certain aptitudes that the person has to have in order to go through a postgraduate training in physics. So I think it's very important that the mentors of that particular student very early in the student's evolution identify if the student has an aptitude and counsel them appropriately as to whether they should or should not go down this particular pathway. We have seen in our own programs people coming into very difficult residency programs, applying into very difficult residency programs, and they have no aptitude for that particular residency. So it is very important that you are careful in selecting what specialty training you will go in. What are the comparisons between undergraduate and postgraduate studies? Undergraduate, as most of you know, is a very broad focus. Knowledge is gained, that you gain is very generic. And that is true because you need to have a broad base of knowledge in order to then start your graduate education. Instruction in an undergraduate program is very much structured. You have those courses, and you have to take certain assessment tests. It's a very structured environment. You take 3 years or 4 years of that structured environment, and you graduate. It initiates, but does not really prepare you to be a lifelong learner. Okay, you start to teach yourself, but you do not have, there's no DNA change that has taken place in you where genetically you will then transform into a lifelong learner. And then it is obviously required for postgraduate studies. On the contrary, the postgraduate education is more focused in nature. Either you're going to do a certain area of physics, it becomes very, very, very narrowed. Or you're going to become a interventional cardiologist, or you're going to become a neurosurgeon. So it is very specified area that you are now starting to hone in both your aptitude, your knowledge, and your skills. Knowledge and skills that are gained are more specific, as we just mentioned. Instruction is more vague and less guided. Now, not necessarily in medicine. In medicine, the instructions are very much focused and guided. But in areas of humanities and others, it is very vague and less guided. You actually basically teach yourself in postgraduate education, in humanities. Now, here is where you actually start to become a lifelong learner. Then nobody is actually going to ask you or force you to study. Nobody is actually going to ask you or force you to go into library and pull the latest article on a particular disease or a particular topic. Here is where you actually start to evolve into developing a passion for acquisition of new knowledge. And that is where you start to have a genetic transformation of becoming a lifelong learner. And as I mentioned previously, the learning is more self-directed. You are the owner of your own destiny. Nobody is going to tell you whether you went to the library today or not, whether you attended a class or not. It is up to you to decide how much effort you're going to put, and that would be the outcome that you will get at the end of the day. Now, cultural expectations, and here I'm going to actually speak more about my own experiences because I came from a very different culture. I came from a culture which was very similar to yours into the United States about 30 years ago. And some of the things that we are now witnessing, and obviously in 3 decades things have changed, but some of the things that we are now witnessing in our own program from a lot of Saudi students and Saudi residents that are currently in our program. So I would like to humbly suggest that if you lack cultural competence, that's a suicide both personally and professionally. I could not put it any other way. A lot of students who come to our residency program for interviews, and those who do not get selected, I can tell you that vast majority of those who do not get selected is because of their lack of cultural competence. Their inability at times to shake hands of a female who is actually a faculty, one of the faculty who is in the program interviewing the student. Or not sit next to a female resident who is actually in a dinner table when they go out for dinner or lunch. Okay? Many of these incidences, and I can go on and on to give you specific incidences of cultural incompetence that have led to a disaster as far as the professional life of that individual was concerned. So this is a key example where a lady has actually extended her hand to acknowledge your presence, and you have ignored it. And this has happened on many occasions, and when we approach these particular individuals, we are told that this is not actually allowed in our religion. Now, there is a religious barrier, and there is a cultural incompetence here. So now what we have started to do is that every student who comes into our program, Saudi student who comes to our program, goes through 1 week of a acculturation course to help them understand and to adapt them to the American culture. We don't want you to become Americans. I'm not suggesting that. What I am suggesting is that we want you to be successful. In order for you to be successful, there are certain things you have to do, least of which is not to accept the hand of a lady when she extends it. There are some visible cultural differences, and again, I'm speaking from my own personal experience. And I apologize if this personal experience does not translate into mass experience of the valuable audience here. And there are some invisible cultural limitations. So the visible one are the communication style. The most important one is the communication style. How would you communicate with a particular individual? There are a lot of cultural elements that get into your communication styles. I have had students who have come and sat through a meeting with me with their legs crossed in front of each other, with their hands behind their back of their head, sitting as if I'm having a coffee with them in a cafe. Now, that may be absolutely okay for them, but we are having a professional conversation, and there is a certain manner of professional etiquettes that are required. Attitude towards conflict. You will have conflicts, okay? And this is an extremely difficult task when you are faced with conflicts, and how do you handle those conflicts is important. Approaching to completing a task. When I tell you, or when your mentor requests you to do a certain thing, it may be okay for you to just not complete it in your own culture, but it is absolutely unacceptable in the American culture. If you accept a task, you have to complete it. And there have been numerous occasions, including the one that happened last week, where two of the interns in our program did not complete a task that was given to them. And obviously, they got a call into our office. The decision-making style is extremely important. When you make decisions, do you take all facts into consideration? Is your decision based on bias, or is it unbiased? Is your decision does it have an element of racial disparity in it? So I think it's extremely important that you pay attention to these details. Attitude towards disclosure. There is something called confidential information. Okay, and in our world, that confidential information about patients is extremely confidential. And we have seen some of the students from different parts of the world who actually share confidential information with each other in public places about the patients without any hesitation. That's extremely difficult and no for a culture in the United States. I think there are what drives these visible differences is your belief and your values. And what is your perception? Many of you have come to our program, and not only to the program at Akshana, but I'm talking about, I have been engaged with 5 universities in the United States, from Boston, Harvard and Boston universities, to Drexel, to University of Pittsburgh, to the Tennessee Board of Regents, to University of South Florida, and now to Akshana. And this has been something that I have witnessed in all of these places. You basically say, I don't care about American culture. And that is fine, which is perfectly all right. But if you don't care about American culture, I can assure you that you will have difficulties as you go along. Now, nobody is suggesting that you party all night or you drink. That is not American culture, by the way. There are good sides of the American culture, great sides of the American culture, which will make you a better human being, which will make you a more professional human being. And those are the attributes I'm talking about. So we talk about America and we'd say that, American cultural intelligence is extremely high. We are very receptive to people coming from multicultural backgrounds. The reality is that we are not that good. We have a long way to go. And this is actually something that was published by World Health Organization and United Nations recently, that if the cultural intelligence of the average intelligence of the world is 1, then the country that has most cultural tolerance and cultural intelligence is actually Singapore. And followed by Germany, and then come all the rest of the countries. Now, it is interesting because if you look at these numbers, these are also the numbers for all those countries which are successful. And the product of these countries are successful because they have actually inherited in their genetic makeup a cultural competence and intelligence. So I think it's very important that, and I was unable to find one for Saudi Arabia, frankly. If you do not have if you're unsuccessful in adapting to a culture, you will be isolated. You will have anxiety and worry. Your performance is going to deteriorate. You will be very high nervous anxiety, and you will find yourself helpless. And we do not want any of the students from the United States to be in that particular position. This is a perfect example of what I say, that when I talk about some of the leaders of the world and some of the countries which actually have very high intelligence still continue to have cultural incompetence. You can see what is happening here. They're allowing a female to pick up a paper. This is a real event that happened at one of the G8 meetings, where the President Obama dropped a piece of paper, and this lady, and he had little or no hesitation in allowing her to pick up the paper while he stands there and talks to other members, male presidents of the world. So I think we have to continue to improve. I'm the first to say that I come from a country where we are culturally tolerant, but we have to continue to improve our tolerance in this particular area. I leave you with this particular saying that success depends upon previous preparation, and without such preparation, there is sure to be failure. So before you come to the United States, prepare yourself. And if you prepare yourself, you will have a successful outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sahel, for this nice eye-opener speech. And I think the current message here is important, that if you're going to the States, you have to prepare yourself for the culture there. We're not saying this culture is better than the other, but if you're willing to continue there and go there, you have to read about it, prepare yourself so you can succeed in getting what you are going for. Our second speaker is Dr. George Jabour, and he's a Master Program of Finance Director and a Professor of Finance, Associate Dean of Executive Education, School of Business, George Washington University. Please welcome Dr. George.
Assalamu alaikum. It's a pleasure here to be with you today. In the last few days, I was surrounded by all medical doctors, and I am from the business school, so you can feel the pressure. And I was asked actually to talk about several topics, including the overview of the present status of undergraduate and postgraduate education in the US, development, the strong demand for postgraduate student admission requirements, process, and opportunities. So it will be a little bit technical. I hope you don't mind it. My references were from the US Department of Education, the National Center of Education Studies, the Association to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business, Institute of Education Sciences, and Wikipedia website. For the overview, we have seen in the recent dates, actually, an increasing in resources, especially through technology, increased opportunities globally, increased flexibility in teaching methods, including distance learning, increased number of electives. It is not anymore required courses, the core courses that people have to take, but more electives, and increased demand for specialized degrees, especially at the master's level. This is some history. and this is a designation between 2001 versus the 2010-2011. You can see that most of the disciplines are increased. This is not a comprehensive list, by the way. The total undergraduate enrollments have increased in the US by about 38% over those years. You can see that the business has increased a lot. The sciences, health sciences increased a lot. Only education slightly went down. I can see that better, I think. For the master's program, you have the same norm. An increase in the business, in education, in health sciences, in engineering, and in public administration. What you don't see here, actually, the highest increase was in homeland security. It increased more than 160%. For doctor's degrees, there was an increase in health sciences, again, in legal professions and studies, in education, in engineering, biological, and biomedical sciences. This is kind of a review of what's happening in the next 10 years or so. For the 5 disciplines that are listed there, health, legal, education, engineering, you can see that 46% were in the health professions. Now we are talking about projections for the future. Those projections were based in 2010. It does not take into consideration the international students in the US. It does take the enrollments. It doesn't take into consideration the cost. It does take into consideration the age of the population. It does take into consideration the disposable income and the unemployment rates. You can see that projections are still good. They are not as before, but they continue to grow. In this slide, you can see the differences in the different age groups in 1996, 2010, and 2021 projected. You can see that there is a continuing growth, but the increase is at a decreasing rate. This is the difference per gender. You can see that the number of women enrolled in post-secondary degrees is higher than men, as well as for the projections, it's also the case. In terms of full-time, part-time, they are both increasing, but there will be more increase in the part-time for different reasons. Enrollment on postgraduates by undergraduate and postgraduate, you can see that undergraduate continues to grow. There is also an increase in postgraduate, but at a lower pace. For public institutions versus private institutions, in the first 14 years in this slide, between 1996 and 2010, private schools increased by about 80%, where the public schools increased by about 45%. But they both are projected to increase by 15%. So this was some technicalities actually about the numbers. But for development, we can see more and more online programs, local and global residencies, education, hybrid programs between face-to-face and online, increased number of applications in all universities in the US, increased interest from foreign countries, increased number of consultants, and this is very important development now between right and best. A lot of people, they look at the ranking of universities, but nowadays a lot of people, they are looking whether this university is a good fit for their child, for example, for this man or this woman. That's what I meant by right versus best. It is the right fit. Some people, they perform better in small schools, in small classes, etc. Some of them, they are looking for the best university based on ranking. Increased number of wait lists, funding shifted from family to loans, and this may become a serious problem in the future. Increased numbers of filled seats by December, especially for the undergraduates. Students used to wait until March or April to get their admission decision. Nowadays, most of them, they are getting their decisions in December. And this is due to the increased number of early decision. I hope you know the difference between early decision, early action, and regular admission. With early decision, it's a binding contract. That means if you are admitted to a school, you have to go to that school. It is not legal commitment, but it is a moral, ethical commitment. For the early action, also, you don't have to go to that school, but you get an answer early. By mid-December, you get an answer. For both early decision and early action, the deadline is kind of November, but you get your answers in December. There is an increase in use of subject tests. If you're familiar with SAT, for example, they have subject tests that they are taking. More and more, they are requiring that. For postgraduate, there is a stronger demand for specialized degrees, especially in business schools. MBAs were flat in the last 5 years, but specialized degrees increased by about 40%. That's due probably for the job requirements and or personal desire. The admission process for undergraduates is online, mostly online applications. A lot of schools, they do not accept anymore paper applications. There is what we call common applications where you can apply to several schools. It's the same application, but you tell them which universities you would like to send them to. The degree, the program, and the institution specifics. Standardized tests like SAT, for example. Interviews. Work experience, if any. Statement of purpose is very important. A lot of schools, they read them very carefully to see whether there is a good fit between the applicant and the school, and some opportunities. More than 2675 four-year non-profit schools, based on that. The process starts at the junior year of high school, but most actively in the senior year. Graduates from high school peaked at 3.3 million in 2008, but expected to decline through 2015 before they rebound to 23 million in college in 2020. 25% of applicants, they apply for more than 7 schools. Admission steps that you have to pay attention to. First, the deadlines. You have to beat the deadlines. The choices, what kind of admission you would like to look at, early admission, etc. The essays, a lot of universities pay attention to the essays that you are writing. You visit the campus, interviews. Some universities, they require personal interviews or phone interviews. Most are centralized, not for a specific college or major. That means you don't specify what school you are going to. They have centralized admission process at the university level, not at the school level or faculty level. The common applications expedite the process. It becomes much faster. To evaluate an admission decision or an admission for application, they look at the grades of in the preparatory courses, the strength of the curriculum. They look at courses. Did you take some sciences, for example, beyond the required? Or you took, for example, the soft courses. Some people call soft like music, dance, something along those lines. Some of them, they look at it negatively. Some of them, they look at it positively, depending on which major you are applying to. Your test scores, your GPA, your essays again, your class rank. A lot of universities, especially the ranked one, they will look, where do you stand in your class? If you are not in the top 10% or 15 or 25%, they will not look at your application. Your counselor recommendation is very important, your teacher recommendation also, subject scores and extracurricular activities. A lot of universities, they would like not to be book smart people, they would like to have well-rounded students. Other factors, though they are controversial, diversity issues. Some universities, they would like to have a diverse group. They look at the ethnical group, for example, geographical location, etc. Some other universities, they are not interested in that. Legacy, if you have siblings, your parents going to the same school or something, so you may have a better chance to get into that school through what we call the legacy program. Family wealth. Although it's illegal to make an admission decisions based on your wealth or something, but some people, they may look at it, although it's not legal. Personal connections always works, networking. Again, it's controversial. Maybe some people, they will not admit it, but it does exist. Admission tests, you have two tests that are for undergraduate, the ACT, it's mostly used in the South and the Midwest, or the SAT, which is in the East and the West. Percentage-wise, is about 50-50 use. Low score, if someone has a low score, apply to universities where such scores are optional. Some universities, they don't require them. They ask you to submit them as an option. SAT subject tests are important to some schools also. If you don't know the difference between the ACT and the SAT, I thought I put some items that differentiate them. ACT is count-based, where the SAT is reasoning ability test. More emphasis for ACT on higher math, but for the SAT is more emphasis on vocabulary. For ACT is longer questions versus tricky questions. No penalty for wrong answers versus penalty for wrong answers. A greater choice of score, fewer options. So you can see the difference. Some people, they don't do well in SAT, they do much better in ACT and vice versa. So know yourself and see which score or which test suits you better. Admission for postgraduates, it depends on the program specifics, the work experience, especially in the business field, your test scores, your GPAs, your interviews again, your recommendations and statement of purpose. Your statement of purpose is very important at the graduate level to see whether really there is a good fit between what you are looking for and the program itself. A lot of universities, including mine at George Washington University, if it is a bad fit, we tell you you should go somewhere else. We can give you some advice to go to where you should belong or something. Some people, they don't know exactly what they are looking for. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. George, for your nice presentation and concise, and you helped us in the timing because we started a bit late. So our third speaker today is Dr. Irina Bird, and she's an assistant professor of gynecology and obstetrics and neurology. She's the director of research at maternal fetal medicine, member of the pathobiology graduate program, and she's from Johns Hopkins. Please welcome Irina.
Assalamu alaikum. I was asked today to speak in regards to three objectives for this workshop. How do we encourage creation and application of new methods of learning? How do we evaluate student learning experiences in both master's and PhD degrees? And what are the common difficulties in learning during undergraduate and postgraduate education? So I'm going to start with a case study number one. I am from Johns Hopkins University, so I'm going to be speaking about the programs that I have firsthand knowledge. So School of Medicine has a graduate program of cellular and molecular medicine. This program accepts candidates after their bachelor's degree in biology, biochemistry, genetics, molecular sciences, as well as a combined MD, PhD program students. Those that graduated already and have some kind of a bachelor's degree are in medical school and getting their combined MD, PhD degree. There are some instances that, and we could discuss that, when students are not able to complete the PhD degree following their bachelor's degree. Those students may receive master's degree, and that's what I'm going to be talking about as well. So this gives you an overview of first-year curriculum of graduate school, first year of a PhD program in cellular and molecular medicine. Now, as Dr. Rao mentioned, this is a more focused area, but the subjects are taught in more vague fashion and require some more learning on behalf of students. So this is a curriculum, and as you can see here, introduction to human body, topics in cellular and molecular medicine, molecular biology and genomics, genetics, pathways and regulation, cell structure and dynamics, core discussions, cellular and molecular basis of disease, and research. Research requires 3 10-week rotations. Now, unlike the bachelor's degree, the undergraduate degree, where you have a whole list of courses that you could choose from and the core requirements that you have to take over 4 years, and then you have a choice how to compile these classes together to fill the 4 years of your education. In graduate school, these classes are taken together with other students in your program. So you have a very regimented curriculum, and you study together, and you help each other. What is a kicker here is that there is a minimum grade that is required. For our program, minimum grade is B. So if a student is not achieving a minimum grade of B in the graduate program in a class, asked to retake the class. Guess what happens if they don't achieve a B next time? Bye-bye. Thanks for coming. So this is very important, and we'll discuss what are the learning difficulties and how we get around them. So this is very important and different from undergraduate degree where, you know, students are known to receive grades of C, C+, D. This is a different level of education. And at this time, we really have to make sure that we are graduating professionals that are competent. What are the research rotations? So because I'm giving you an example of a biology program and the one that requires, you know, somebody to go on to develop skills as a person who is creating experiments, publishing, etc., these students are required to conduct research at least in 3 different laboratories during the first year of training. And so then they select the area within those laboratories that they are interested in. And after completing these 3 different projects, they're selecting a laboratory in which they will continue doing research for the duration of the PhD. And each student is assigned a rotation advisor who will assist that student through the rotation selection process. The main purpose of those laboratory rotations is to assure that students have exposure to a variety of research topics, techniques, approaches, leading ultimately to selection of the thesis mentor and laboratory. Now, here's a commonality for all PhD programs. In majority of PhD programs, I would say 99%, a student is required to come up with a thesis project where they will present at the end of the thesis, their thesis, and they will defend it. Second-year curriculum, and usually PhD degrees have 2 years of curriculum, the studies, really not a full second year. And then you go on to work in the laboratories or in your field of study and working on your thesis. So this is an example. At the end of the second year, you're required to do an oral examination, okay? That's when professors could ask you about the studies over a course of 1.5 years. Everything that was taught is asked in a fashion in front of a committee. So how is oral examination administered? It's administered by graduate board of the university. All programs go through that board, whether biology, whether it's architecture, whether it's, you know, different programs. This examination evaluates the depth and breadth of student activities during those 1.5 to 2 years. Usually program supplies 5 faculty, and applicant or program student selects 3 possible committee members. And ultimately then, between a student and the program, 3 are selected from program and 2 from the candidate. And so that's the committee for the oral exam. Then, once the oral exam is completed, the student has successfully passed their oral exam, they go on to select their committee for thesis. So this is a very complicated process. I'm just giving you a roadmap for what's there awaiting you. This committee meets then with a candidate on a yearly basis. And for second-year students who are usually just beginning their research, this meeting should involve primarily detailed discussion of their proposed thesis. And this committee decides when it's time for a student to graduate ultimately and defend. So what is a thesis proposal? Students present to the committee prior to their meeting a written form of proposal for their thesis work. Now, in some bachelor programs, this is a similar process. When you're enrolled in undergraduate degrees in most of the Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale, all the schools that are Eastern Coast that are Ivy League and top schools, such as Johns Hopkins, you are required to graduate from undergraduate degree with a similar thesis proposal. And that has a format of National Institute of Health proposal application. And ultimately, a copy is kept forever in the program office. So students in the third and subsequent year, the meetings with the thesis committee requires discussion of both what's the progress and what's in the future, and then committee decides when to graduate. So what's the dissertation? Once the committee has decided that it's time for one to go on to defend their thesis, the student presents the thesis, and it's expected that the thesis will lead to a publication. Usually, though, I have to tell you, at Johns Hopkins, 2 or 3 publications come out from any student that's in graduate program. It is actually expected that people applying for a graduate degree have already some kind of form of involvement during undergraduate years. So it's so important on an undergraduate level to get involved in research and to be proactive in where you're going next in your life. So what about novel methods of learning? What do we have for novel methods of learning? This is case study number 2, graduate program in pathobiology. This is an example. So because these programs don't require medical knowledge and they're in School of Medicine, what School of Medicine did for these programs, they implemented translational research rotation. So if you had your undergraduate degree, let's say in biology, and you are in the field of pathobiology, which deals with majority of diseases, and so they have implemented one course that runs over several years, and you could take several rotations in it, where you go to pathology lab and you basically practice together with surgical pathologists, diagnosis of all the specimens that go through and looking at patients' history. So these translational and sort of workshop-like methods help students to understand diseases in the context in which they will be working in the future and designing experiments. So what are the evaluation checkpoints? First of all, the classes. As I mentioned, B+ average is required. Oral examination, thesis proposal, doctoral dissertation. What is most important, and here's, I have a speech for you. What is important and what we have noticed that is not coming through from a lot of students from Saudi are important letters of recommendation. Life is just beginning, and it's important to receive a great letter of recommendation while you're an undergraduate student or you're a graduate student. There's a special format for these letters of recommendation, and that's expected when we look at the application on the graduate level and the graduate level. What is the format usually of a letter of recommendation? What we have seen for applicants from Saudi Arabia is very standard one-page letters that basically fill in the student's name and have the same standard form. Did well on this, great in ethics, great in this, great in that. The format for United States letters of recommendation and sort of is a well-known, and I'll try to explain to you, and we're trying to do now workshops to educate also our professors here, collaborators here, how to write the letters in a format that's understood by United States system. So the first paragraph in the letter usually is a strong opening paragraph. What an excellent match a candidate has for this position. And at the end of graduate school, I mean, you're going to postdoctorate studies and you're going for job applications, you really need those letters of recommendations. So you ask those letters of recommendation from people that you've developed the closest relationship. They need to explain in the second paragraph how long they have known you and in what capacity. Okay? There are following paragraphs about your skills, leadership skills. Were you an administrative chief resident if you're in medicine? Were you president of a club if you are undergraduate or graduate school? And what is your initiative skills? Did you start any programs or courses while you're there? Did you tutor? Did you have interest in education and teaching? Are you adaptive in new skills? Are you first to lead something? Are you a great leader? Are you great at planning? Those are important things that need to go into the letter. And guess what? They need to use also examples. They just can't say, oh, he's a great planner. When they make a statement like this and I'm evaluating the letter, I want to know exactly what they planned. Give an example. So these are very important parts of the letter that are going on. It has to have a very strong closing paragraph. So, for example, he or she is poised to make substantial contribution towards understanding of how, blah, blah, and I have to say something, strong about the person again. There are different formats for different letters. There's a dean's letter format, there's a chairman's letter format, and there's a mentor's letter format. For example, a mentor is a person who's known you for a long time. During an undergraduate degree, it's your mentor for thesis or your advisor. They should know you really, really well. So get to know them well so they could write you a 2-page letter stating several examples of your excellent work and telling how great you are and basically advertising you and telling the world how great you are. 1-page letters are usually written by chairman. It's understood that chairman cannot write you a 2-page letter, and we just need to, from chairman, to say, this is a great candidate, graduated from this institution. I've known candidate because they rotated through my department, and everybody has great things to say. The letter, there's different nuances when the letter says, with no reservation, as opposed to, I give my highest recommendation. Those nuances actually mean a lot in American language. Also, ask them, when you're asking for letters of recommendation, make sure you ask the letter givers to say that they will give you a great letter of recommendation. What sometimes happens is that they agree to write you a letter of recommendation, but write you a bad letter of recommendation. So that's great in a system where you could see the letter and not send it. But what's basically a custom in the United States is to waive the right to see the letter. And you're expected to waive the right to see the letter. So how would you know if you're waiving voluntarily to see the letter and they're not sending it to you undercover in a separate email because they want you to see how great the letter is? So if you waive the letter, to see the letter, you ethically have no right to ask for the letter. And if they wrote you a bad letter, you would never know, and then people will not invite you for interviews, and people will not give you a chance to enter a program. So we, as providers of letters, need to learn how to say no, and you, as people asking for letters, could say one sentence, would you be able to give me a great letter of recommendation? And for them to agree. So just a letter of recommendation does not do when you're waiving a right to see it. So what are common learning difficulties during undergraduate and postgraduate education? Not understanding concepts. And it's an easy solution. Universities have tutoring available for those who cannot understand concepts. Not doing well in multiple choice questions. It depends how you were brought up. If the system that you come from has multiple choice questions or doesn't have multiple choice questions. Again, those tricks can be learned through tutoring. and tutoring usually is available. If it's not, you could always look up online. There are always upper years giving some levels of tutoring. And then ultimately, you know, students sometimes fail to invest time in learning. Everything is time. If you want yourself to do well, you need to put in time. And what's hard issue to address, how can you put in time if you're not interested? Are you not interested in subject? Maybe that subject is not for you. Or you're not interested by teacher and instructor. They're not inspiring you to learn. Okay? And that's how we fail. We fail sometimes at not being inspirational help. So sometimes we need to inspire people to learn by mnemonics. So I'm going to give you, I'm a physician. And I learn a lot through mnemonics. You know, so much information must be learned during medical school. And this is simple mnemonic for appendicitis, or differential for right lower quadrant pain. And it's in the word appendicitis itself. And you could see that each letter stands for different kind of diagnosis on the differential diagnosis list. Okay? Mnemonics exist for everything, for biology, for biochemistry. They're all available online. And so, you know, that sometimes decreases invested time in learning because you could simply memorize different ways of mnemonics. This is biochemistry mnemonics, memorizing amino acids. Okay? For example, each letter in the sentence that is at the top, any help in learning these little molecules proves truly valuable, stands for one amino acid. And so that gives you a clue how to remember the names of amino acids. I mean, these are 20 amino acids. Try learning them right away. You need some kind of cues. And those are mnemonics that exist in architecture, in engineering, in everything. Okay? So those are the things that I wanted to share with you. And I hope that you guys succeed in where you're going and have great successes to tell other people.
All right. Thank you very much for this valuable speech, and I think the beauty of the three speeches that they are different and they complement each other, so giving the idea from one side to the other. So now we're open for questions, and if you raise your hand, we can find the questions. So any questions from up there, the female side? The microphone is there, or if there are questions from the male side here. If I start from the valuable speakers, if I want from you to give one single advice at the end to these students who are willing to go to the United States to complete their studies, so to summarize, just one single advice from each one of you to our students. So can we start with Dr. Suhail?
Actually, it's a very easy one. Work hard. I have no other advice for you. Just this is going for your postgraduate studies to United States is a serious commitment, and that could only be accomplished if you work hard and you are committed to going through the process, which is going to be very tedious.
Okay. George?
In addition to that, I would like to tell you to not copy and paste. In the business school especially, this is plagiarism at least, and I'm sure in other fields. And it's cultural. In some cultures, if they copy and paste, it's acceptable, but not in America. This is a serious problem.
Okay, Irina?
And I would like to add also, find yourself a great mentor. When you get to United States, find somebody that you think are going to be supporting you through your career, and they could stay your long-time mentor. That shouldn't be the first person you meet, but somebody you could bond and they understand you and you understand them, and you could share something from your studies to your family issues, ask them for advice. This is very, very important for a career.
Okay, thank you. So, any questions? Okay.
Okay, so it seems like everybody is still shy to ask questions, so I will start and take the lead. My question is to Dr. Irina Bird. How crucial is it, to your opinion, for medical students early in their medical education to get involved into research activity, especially talking about basic science research versus clinical research? Thank you.
For medical students specifically?
For medical students or for those who are seeking higher education but early in their medical education?
Oh, I think it's very important. What we found in our institution, if students come for a year of research, it serves also for them like a year of culturalization, a year of learning how to conduct evidence-based medicine, a year of learning how research is done, well, Johns Hopkins in my specific case, and have an opportunity to attend really great lecture series, and it inspires a lot of students, opens their eyes into what is out there and how they could make their life better and of Saudi Arabia life better when they come back. So once they get into residencies and fellowships, we hope that we could get that spark into them, that they will come and do research coming back, but it also gives them letters of recommendation and certainly the opportunities for joining better residencies.
And may I add that, as Dr. Bird said, I think you don't have to wait till you come to the United States to start your research. There are many research opportunities that are available in Saudi Arabia at the present time. Research actually is one of those activities that differentiates you from the rest of the students. It creates a different class of individual. And I strongly recommend not to wait till you come to the United States. Get engaged in research in Saudi Arabia. Provide a differentiating factor even before you come to the American soil, and that's going to be a great help to you.
Just want to make a comment, if I may. Faiz Bora from New York. So I wear two hats. I'm a program director for surgery, and I'm also director of research, and just want to highlight the comments made by our speakers. I think it is absolutely critical to work hard, and I think it is perhaps the most important thing to find yourself a mentor and a lifelong learning mentor. It is also critical to be involved in research as soon as you can. It helps you understand the science of medicine, and it provides you with a skill set and a language that's going to stay with you throughout. And as an applicant, particularly as an applicant who's looking at a competitive specialty like surgery, it is what really differentiates you from the other candidates. So absolutely critical to get involved as soon as possible here in Saudi Arabia, and then hopefully continue that in the US if you have an opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Pat, do you have something to add? Yeah. Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
In relation to the barrier for education for undergraduate and postgraduate studies, I need to ask about the tutorial method in teaching, why it's one of the barriers.
Can you assign whom you are asking of the panel?
I need to ask about the barrier for education in relation to tutorial method in teaching. Why the tutorial method is one of the most barrier in education? What is the difference in tutorial in undergraduate and postgraduate?
The tutorial,
is the question what about criteria for postgraduate?
Yes, in tutorial.
Criteria for admission?
Maybe in the criteria for admission or during the study or during an exam and so on.
So the undergraduate education happens after one graduates from high school, and the postgraduate is after that bachelor's degree. So for PhD, that's a lifelong sort of learning to become a professional. So the criteria after high school are just to sum up, and maybe George could sum up with the criteria for undergraduate school, and then I'll sum up for the graduate school.
Well, for undergraduate, you have to have your grades, of course, from high school. Usually they ask you for a letter of recommendation from your counselor, from your teachers. They look at your courses, if you are taking AP courses or what kind of courses you are taking. They will look at your TOEFL if you are international students or IELTS. They will look at your SAT or ACT test. It depends on which one you are taking. And then if you have any work experience and so forth, that will be helpful.
And for the graduate school, again, they look for your grade point average in a bachelor's degree. That's very important. So right now, if anybody is undergraduate degree, getting their bachelor's degree, what we've noticed is that, you know, in Saudi Arabia, for example, medical degree is at the bachelor degree, and a lot of students think that this is their terminal degree and they will no longer have to show their grade point average to anybody. But once they apply for residencies and any postdoctorate education in the United States, everybody wants to see their grade point average. So make sure you get really great grades. And then usually into graduate school, there are different similar tests, but different entrance tests that one needs to take. And they're called GRE tests, and they're also by subspecialties, somewhat similar to SAT tests. TOEFL is required by some schools, and a minimal requirement is 100, I think, taken by the computer skill test. What is it? Computer-based. And so you have to look into the requirements of each school. They might be different. The requirements for the GRE, the specialty GRE or GMAT if it's a business school, I guess, and then what their grade point average requirements, etc.
I must say something about the business schools. Actually, they are different. For the MBA, for example, Master of Business Administration, if you go to a good school, they require at least 2 years of full-time work experience after your bachelor's degree. And this is, related to accreditation and so forth and ranking also. If you apply for specialized degrees in business, they may waive the work experience depending on the subject matter. If you are applying for finance, for example, you may not need to have work experience. It's desirable but not required. If you are applying for project management, for example, it is required. So it depends really on the topic that you are applying for.
There are a couple of more variables that you need to keep in mind. If you have an advanced degree from your country, such as an MBBS or any other degree, there is a possibility for waiver of GRE if you want to go into doctoral programs in basic sciences. Many universities actually do that. If you request a waiver for GRE, provided your other requirements for entrance have been met. The second important variable is that there are certain programs which require, irrespective of whether you have met or all the other requirements, that you be a US citizen or at least a resident alien. And for example, in MD program or in pharmacy program in United States, it's a requirement that you be a US citizen or at least a resident of United States.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. First of all, I would thank you, and we appreciate your time and efforts and all the tips you gave us. I wanted to ask, you mentioned in the applications that there's something called common applications, and I think in UK there's something called UCAS. In US, is there like a recommended website or a name for the common applications?
Yeah, there is a website actually. When you go to any university, actually, they will tell you whether you are applying for a common application or not.
Okay. So there's like...
but I don't know the website by heart.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right. If I want to, just because I listened to Dr. Sohail in another presentation, and if I can ask you just to elaborate more In that path that you during your presentation, the tips for the Saudi resident who goes there and he wants to apply and join a program in the US. So more tips from your side to get adapted as quick as possible and then get more likely to get accepted.
So for a Saudi student, or for that matter, forget about Saudi, it is for international medical students, the more and more you look like an American graduate, the more likelihood that you will get into American residency program. That does not mean that you have to change the color of your skin or develop green eyes. What it actually implies is that you create an environment around you, for example, USMLE, doing research, developing a relationship with a group of physicians or mentors who are going to provide the letters of references, doing clinical attachments. My advice to you would be that if you're interested, and it is a long and arduous course, but if you're interested in going to the United States, start working on that particular process very early in your medical school, not after your graduation, which implies that as soon as possible, and when you are ready, you do a clinical rotation in the United States in an area of interest. Your first clinical rotation should normally be not focused on a subspecialty, but they should be more in general subjects such as internal medicine, pediatrics, and general surgery and alike. Do at least 2 or 3 years of rotations during the summer. Try to find some rotations for yourself during your 7th or internship year. And try to do those rotations in area of your specializations so that you start to develop relationships with the faculty who potentially could be your references in the future. If you've had the opportunity, start doing research. That is one of the differentiators that is going to propel your candidacy many steps ahead of other applicants. Many of you would actually end up going to Kaplan. It is a required, but a required curse for you. And I will be very frank, because it takes you away from clinical setting for an extended period of time. And you have that extended period of time creates a question in the minds of program directors as to how well you will fit when you come into residency training. Bear in mind, on July 1st, when you start your residency, some of you may be on call. And therefore, you have to do physicals and diagnosis of the patient. And many of you have not been in a clinical environment for a sizable period of time. Some of you, after finishing your Kaplan, have gone into clinical research or basic research and may be away from clinical setting for a 2 to 3 year period. 2 to 3 years is a long period to be away from clinical setting. So try to shorten that particular period as much as possible and try to, during that period, do as much clinical rotations as possible.
Thank you very much. There's one question from...
First of all, thank you very much. We appreciate your speech. My question about letter of recommendation. You talked about the importance of letter recommendations and acceptance in Johns Hopkins in higher education. However, there's many requirements, such as USMLE's Step 1, Step 2, and clinical research. But is there like a percentage for letter recommendation to be accepted in certain programs?
So I'm going to tell you what generally, it's a great question, what you're competing against. You're competing against American graduates for the same positions in residency. And so what happens is everybody has a dean's letter. A dean's letter is a compilation of all your rotation comments that dean's office put together for all graduates. You're against a mentor's recommendation letter. As I said, mentor's recommendation letter is 2 pages long usually for a student that's applying, that they did research during medical school. And then the rotations where they did some clerkships, medical students ask for letters of recommendation from their preceptors at those rotations. So you need to replicate that as much as possible when you're applying. And what Dr. Rao said, you need to look as American candidate would look like. Whether your school provides a dean's letter or not, they could write that they don't provide a dean's letter, let's say, that's fine. But your chairman still needs to provide a letter, and then you need to still get letters from clerkships that you did in United States, and perhaps a mentor through your research. So those are the letters of recommendations you need. What I've noticed, it's harder to get in just with, not impossible, but harder to get in just with Saudi letters of recommendation. What would you say?
I concur with you. I think in 2012, through the courtesy of Sakam and Dr. Summer, we provided a template letter for Dean's Letter, which was distributed to the Council of Deans in Saudi Arabia. This was a letter just to give them an idea, and 3 institutions, including ours, provided those template letters to her. Unfortunately, to date, none of the deans of any medical school in Saudi Arabia have adopted any of the recommendations that were made to the Council of Deans to actually take this part very, very seriously. So I think it is important. The second thing which Dr. Bird said is equally important. It is much better to have a letter of recommendation from your colleague in the United States that you know, from a program that you know, from an institution that you know, rather than a letter from someone who is from Saudi Arabia. So doing rotations in different departments and different institutions and getting letters of recommendation from them is going to go a long way.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes, it's not all deans. Yeah. In Taiba University, we adopted that, so it's just a little comment. We adopted that, and we started using the same format, and we started now for the last maybe 4 months now, using it, and started writing these detailed, a lot of information written, and it is exhausting, but as long as they are needed, so we had to do that.
I was just waiting for your comment, Khalid.
And to tell you the truth, in many universities, it's not actually dean writing, it's dean's office providing that letter, putting comments down. So dean is just signing that letter and making sure that they agree with everything. But usually there is a person dedicated for that and in student affairs that actually pulls together all the comments.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's expected that dean has no time to write this, so don't expect your dean to know you personally. It's just dean's letters provided to everybody, and usually one person is designated to write that letter. So make sure that person really likes you.
Yeah. Yeah, this is exactly what we did. We assigned the person to write it in details, and then the dean just go quickly through it, make sure that what is written is according to the right format, and then. So if this, yeah. Upstairs, yeah, go ahead.
Hello. My name is Samira, and I'm a graduate from the University of Dammam, Saudi Arabia. And I had a question actually regarding researches. It was my understanding that performing a research in the United States would actually help us impress the program directors there. But now you're saying it's against us, so what would you recommend?
Are you a graduate of a medical school?
Pardon?
Graduate of a medical school?
Yes, I graduated from medical school.
I don't think this is actually going to go against you. If you have done research, that's actually going to differentiate and help you. What I suggested is that don't wait for you to come to the United States to do your research.
Oh, no, I still haven't entered a research program. I'm currently applying for some.
Yes, and it will help you to get into a residency program. Let me put it this way, it's going to make your candidacy more competitive. Whether you get into a residency program or not, that's a separate issue, but you will certainly improve your chances of getting into a residency.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I also would like to add, some students that come to U.S., they're torn whether they have to enter a master's degree or a postgraduate research program for a year. First advice, do not enter both at the same time. You're not going to do a good job in either one. You're not going to impress your mentor, and you're not going to do well in classes that you need to take over 1 year. Number 2, I would recommend strongly masters to those that either don't have a good GPA in their medical school or didn't get into residency, after 1 year of research. It's like a plan B. Something is not working out, you need to increase. But at that time, you already have a letter from that mentor, and you potentially could continue doing some projects and publishing as you're doing master's degree. But starting, with master's degree and research at the same time, and trying to impress your mentor and complete all the courses, close to impossible. We tried that in our institution, and it's just very hard.
May I just add one more thing? And she's right. But one more important component of this is that if you're going to go, let us say, to our institution, I would prefer that you actually do your research in our institution, so that the faculty in your discipline get to know you. It is irrelevant for me if you're coming from Harvard with a master's or a research publications, because our faculty do not still know you. And one of the purpose of actually doing a visiting research fellowship prior to submitting your candidacy for a residency is for the faculty to get to know you as a person and to have some degree of confidence that they would like for you to be their junior colleagues. So this is extremely important. When people say that I have done my master's or research in an organization other than ours, that is not much has much effect on us.
So I just want to make a comment. We have a whole section on research and residency which follows this particular session, so a lot more of your questions can be answered. That runs from 3 to 5.
So, is there any other questions there? If not, I'll ask you another question, because many of our TAs or demonstrators, when we send them to prepare for the USMLE, for example, and they go to Kaplan. The majority, they will go to Kaplan, and they want to spend a year or two there to prepare for the USMLE and get good grades there, and so to be more competitive, to get the best possible grade. I want to know your advice for us. When we send them, should we send them to do a year in Kaplan and then a second year doing research and observership, for example, or a master's degree, or 2 years in Kaplan and then apply? So 2 years in Kaplan versus 1 year of Kaplan plus research and observership, or 1 year of Kaplan plus a master's degree. Which one do you think is a better?
I'm going to start, and then Dr. Rao maybe will continue. What my personal view of this, that each candidate sort of needs a tailored approach.
Yeah.
Depending on their grade point average, depending on their clinical rotations, depending on their willingness to enroll in these rotations while they're doing research. And as I mentioned, master's degree right away is really best for those that don't have grade point average. I would say for those that have grade point average less than 4 out of 5, I would recommend a master's degree because it stands out in applications. And so that way they have a chance to redeem themselves in the American system and say, listen, I put my best foot forward, and here's my GPA from an American institution for 1 year of classes. And so this was just perhaps my junior problem that now is rectified. So it's not for everybody, and sort of, I think SACM is doing a phenomenal job, and Dr. Summer knows all the students that go through practically by name, and in putting them in the right programs and the right path.
Okay. So I have a slightly different view. I agree with Dr. Bird. It's very unfortunate that students from Saudi Arabia actually had to go to Kaplan. That's very unfortunate. At a university recently, in a 6th or 5th medical forum, I gave a talk about how we are wasting our students' time by sending them for these preparatory courses. Implying that we as teachers have failed in our universities to prepare the students for the assessment that is required for USMLE. University of Dammam is actually now, starting this year, would be giving the students the opportunity to take prep courses in Dammam through a company in the United States called Becker. I would strongly advise you that if you are a self-learner, all the material that Kaplan is going to provide is available to you. There is no miracle in what Kaplan provides to you. Learn for yourself. Make sure that you are prepared by doing some bench exams, and then go ahead and give your USMLE.
I have to agree. I felt that Kaplan, and sometimes students get lost in Kaplan. We have some students that have been in the United States for 2 years in Kaplan and only taken one test. I think that's lost time.
Okay. Thank you very much. And if there's no more questions, then please join me to extend our thanks to the 3 great speakers. And we end our session so they can prepare the place for the next session. Thank you very much.